Welcome back on the Space Info podcast. Here we talk about space and everything related to it. If you are passionate about space, astronomy, technology and everything about it, you can join all our social platforms at the Space Info Club or our website at www.spaceinfo.club, where tons of content and a community of experts are there waiting for you. This is the Space Info Club. If you have been listening to the Space Info podcast for some time, now you know that we usually publish our episode on Mondays, but today is a special occasion. Indeed, today we talk about SpaceX, in particular we talk about Starships. We perfectly know that no mission in space has a perfect, and in particular for SpaceX, and in particular even more for SpaceX Starship. Indeed, up to date, no Starship mission has been very perfect 100%, and this time it was no exception. Indeed, there have been some glitches and some things that haven't worked, but the most important goal, the very goal of the mission, has been reached. Indeed, Starship have been in orbit for about 30 minutes and then landed back, splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. And first of all, huge congratulations to everyone inside the Starship team at SpaceX, as well as on the people who made this possible for us to watch the whole event live, with also a record on this side. In particular, during re-entry, we have watched the impressive orbital velocity read in the bottom half of the live measurement, and we have read that it was going at about 27,000 kilometers per hour, which is actually the orbital velocity of object in LEO, low Earth orbit, and indeed already at the altitude of 80 kilometers a reddish glow could be seen around the Starship, and when this becomes thicker, the dissociated electrons inside the plasma strongly interfere because they are conductive, and so they interfere with communication from the spacecraft to Earth, and this basically makes it impossible to see and also listen what's happening there. So it's been this way from the very beginning of space mission up to now, and also it is the very same thing for International Space Station missions, also all other re-entries. We have what's called the re-entry blackout. Indeed, that's exactly due to this phenomenon. But we have seen that up to a certain altitude, well below 80 kilometers, when the first reddish glow appeared around the spacecraft, we have been to witness the live event, the direct communication audio and video directly from the spacecraft. This is due to the connection with Starlink. Most of all is due to the very big dimension of the spacecraft, and is only a preliminary observation of the communication. Indeed, we have been able to assist only the very beginning of the re-entry, and then at the very end of the event, no communication was possible as usual. So maybe it's just a lucky event, but that's maybe a sort of record also on this side. But now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Starship have been into orbit for about 30 minutes. So what happened? Well, the third test flight, they lifted off from South Texas from the Boca Chica Beach. Indeed, it was amidst a gathering of space onlookers, dedicated rocket enthusiasts, and also particular avid SpaceX supporters, which congregated along the southern shores of South Padre Island and its environs. So the colossal Starship vehicle embarked its historic journey, lifting off at 9:25 a.m. EDT, which are 13:25 GMT, and basically something like 8 kilometers apart from the observers. And following the liftoff, Elon Musk, the visionary behind SpaceX, well, no presentation is needed, announced on X, Starship reached orbital velocity, extending his congratulations on the entire SpaceX team. Interestingly, this launch coincided with the 22nd anniversary of SpaceX inception in 2002. So maybe it's a very lucky coincidence, but good luck SpaceX, you're going great. During the liftoff, which have been basically nominal, we are almost used to what's happening, because the initial procedure of the liftoff is basically the very same of the previous flights of Starship. Indeed, we have the liftoff, where all the 33 engines at the bottom of the super heavy booster worked nominal, and this is also a record. No time before happened this, where all the engines have been operative during all the ascending phase, so that's also a record. Congrats SpaceX. But most of all, we assisted to the so-called hot staging, which is the separation of the Starship spacecraft from the booster when the engine of the spacecraft is already starting igniting. So we minimize the loss of altitude, we optimize the whole process, and this was great. Also, after this all worked, the booster started to came back to Earth, and we can observe that some problems are already present. Indeed, not all the engines which are supposed to light up again, not all the 33, but the central ring of engines didn't actually work. So we can see from the diagram on the superimposed images on the live event, we can see that two engines at the beginning, and then only one of the outer ring, the middle ring of the at the base of the booster. We can see that two of these engines have been ignited, but given the fact that they are not very aligned, not very centered with respect to the axis of the spacecraft, they generated some side effects in terms of forces. So the booster is not very stable. We can observe that from the onboard camera that the fins which try to control and stabilize the booster during the descending phase towards the ocean and the landing port actually try to work out and to compensate these oscillations, but maybe the high velocity and also the oscillation and instability of the booster itself contributed to not a perfect landing, and we know basically that the booster was destroyed, so it's useless now. So this is the first thing that didn't work 100% well. But on the same time, the Starship continued to climb and going into orbit. At this timestamp, the spacecraft have already pitched, and now it's flying horizontal, almost parallel to the surface of our planet, and the velocity is still increasing. The top velocity reached by the spacecraft was about 27,000 kilometers. As said, this is basically the orbital velocity. International Space Station is soaring Earth at about 28,000 kilometers per hour, something like that, and this is indeed the orbital velocity of object flying at 400 kilometers of altitude. Clearly, Starship has reached space technically, and also its velocity is typically an orbital velocity. So also from the technical side, we can affirm that this spacecraft was in orbit. No entire orbit was completed. Indeed, the spacecraft remained into orbit for something like half an hour. The whole flight lasted something like 40-45 minutes, and the orbital phase was a little less in terms of time. And then the spacecraft performed, the system on board the spacecraft performed some tests in order to try some systems, some mechanism inside the spacecraft. One of them was the transferring of fuel between an auxiliary tank and a bigger tank. We can see from the images inside of the hollow space of the spacecraft that some leakages, some gases actually started to flow in this room. We don't know if it's as being fuel or some sort of liquid leakage, or it was nominal. It was just the confining atmosphere of the spacecraft itself. We don't know the result of this test of the transferring of the propulsion fuel. But why is it important? Well, basically it is very important because you have to consider that fluids are actually fluids. So when you move them, their inertia actually cause a sloshing inside a tank. So you have to be very sure that this movement of the fluid with respect to the outer container doesn't actually influence the dynamic of the whole system. Indeed, think about a truck carrying a lot of water inside its basically its container. But what happens if the tank is it's running at some velocity and then suddenly breaks? Well, all the fluids starts to move, keeps moving basically in the same direction of the tank, but now the tank is steady. So this movement actually is counteracting the braking of the whole system. Basically, if you think this into more dimensions and in uncontrolled dynamics of the rocket, this can cause a lot of problems in terms indeed of control. So this was one test that was performed on board. Another test we can witness also thanks to the images and the videos we have seen live and are available thanks to SpaceX is the spacecraft trying to open the hatch. Actually is a big door. We can think of it something like the door of the space shuttle. Well, the test is basically the same. They try to open the door and then close again. We can see that the opening test performed quite nominally. Maybe we are not sure. There are no data yet, and maybe engineers are already analyzing the data after the flight. Maybe the closing of the hatch was not 100% nominal. And this is important because, well, the spacecraft has just experiences all the forces and solicitations of the launch. I don't remember the exact number of maximum G's reached by this the Super Heavy booster and then the Starship, but this amount of G's, something like 4 G's, can deform the structure, can have some side effects on the hinges, on the actuators, and also the environment of space, different pressure conditions, for example, can actually alterate the functioning of the system. You can try to simulate things on Earth, you can create mathematical models, engineering tools to simulate the environment, but we perfectly know, Hubble teaches this very well, that you cannot be 100% sure of what things will behave once you are in space. So basically this was to be tested in order to open and close the hatch for future missions, docking missions, maybe servicing missions in low Earth orbit, transferring cargo from Earth to the Moon. Well, this was crucial, and the test seemed to be very interestingly. The results are very encouraging, but we don't know yet for sure. Again, engineers are analyzing these things for after flight. We'll know maybe better in the next days. But now let's talk about the final part of the mission. Something like that left us with some bitter flavor in our mouths, let's say, because we all hope that once in orbit, Starship will be able to land, or well, better splash down in the ocean in a controlled way. So the mission would basically be a complete success, but this didn't happen. Again, space is hard, and things not only can go wrong, but maybe they can just behave differently from what expected. And also, if your control system is perfectly designed, some things can also behave differently as you thought. Indeed, what am I talking about? Well, we can just think about the image of the re-entry, think about the glow around the system, around the whole spacecraft actually, and you can see, if you look at the video, that at the 8 kilometers, also the spacecraft is trying to orient itself, gaining a different attitude with respect to the direction of the flight, is approaching its very famous belly flop maneuver in order to impact the atmosphere in a very efficient way, and also in order to direct all the friction, all the atmospheric drag towards the tiles, which have the function of absorbing the heat and shielding the structure of the spacecraft. But we can see that from the very beginning, two things can be noted. First thing is that the spacecraft is already trying to maneuver itself at the height of around 80 kilometers. Well, you can basically say this because you can observe the fins oriented and moving, trying to control the spacecraft, but actually you don't really have a control authority at this attitude. Well, because the fins are atmospheric efficient. They are atmospheric, let's say, maneuverable tools. You can look at them in this way if you are not strictly technical. So you need some air around you to gain some control authority, and the thicker the atmosphere is, the smaller will be the movement you will need to gain the same control authority. If you don't have air basically around you, the fins are useless. So you should have used your reaction control system, but it seems that the engines didn't start, or actually didn't perform well their behavior. So This is the first glitch that didn't work, that made the spacecraft basically quite uncontrolled. The very second thing is the consequence. So the effect of this thing is that you can appreciate a rolling movement of the spacecraft itself. You can see again from the very same onboard camera, you can see that the surrounding of the images, which is the Atlantic, the Pacific Ocean, sorry, is moving, and you can observe how the spacecraft is rolling around. And this rolling movement basically is kept almost the same, with the same frequency up to the end of the flight. So the Starship didn't perform a control in this sense, and maybe this is one of the main causes of the, let's say, failure of the splashdown. But this is maybe the last thing that went wrong, if wrong is the correct word in this case, that made the mission not really 100% successful. But again, as happened before for Flight 2, Flight 1 and all the previous tests, we have seen that SpaceX is focusing on a very few goals for each test, and the philosophy of the thing is better to do things more times, but concentrate on a specific objective at a time. And if you can just nail that objective, you can keep on improving, you can keep going, you can keep doing things and adding one brick at a time. And so, yeah, the objective of this flight was putting Starship into orbit, and they did it. So congrats to SpaceX. We are looking forward to the next flights, next objective, and yeah, we are longing for seeing this thing on Mars, Moon, and flying around Earth. Thanks to all the SpaceX team, engineers, and also people who made it possible to assist to this event live. And so thank you all for listening up to this point of the podcast. See you on Monday.